Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Science of Superpowers. So glad that you're joining us again. I'm Tonya Dawn Recla, and I have a repeat guest here. I love having people back on the show so we can dive deeply into their work and the synthesis between our work and their work. And you get to hear from some of your favorites. And Karen Abrams is for sure one of our favorites here at the Superpower Network. So we're going to have her say hello. Hi, Karen.
Hi, how you doing? Nice to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad that you're back with us. And you and I've enjoyed many, many conversations and connections along the
Yeah.
way. And so I'm glad that we can share some of that with the audience and
Yeah.
let others in on all of the beautiful information that comes between us when we talk about the passion that we have for the work that we do in the world and how similar it is and the differences. And so we'll get into a little bit of that. Our last episode was Healing for the World. And so if you go to the episode page, folks, I'll have the link for that one if you didn't get a chance to catch that with Karen. But now we're going to be talking all about healing the past. And it's a great add-on or addition or extension of the conversation of healing for the world, because as we look at what's come out of the world since this post-pandemic reality sort of is forming and taking shape, there's a lot of awareness around how our past, present, and future are interconnected, how the programs in our world, we would consider them the human programs that we have that get passed through our genetic lines, our epigenetics, all of the elements that make up who we are and our experiences, what we've seen, what we've heard, what we know to be true, and how that changes. A lot of that is informed in large part by our past, right? Not just our past, but it can also be generational ties. It can be family dynamics. It can be a whole ton of things that come into us in a moment when we think that we're healing from chronic headaches, right? Like we think we're healing a bruise or a bump or something that's occurred for us. In my recent history, a car accident that Justin and I were involved with. And so much comes up in those moments when the body goes through traumatic situations and you really get a chance to look in all the little crevices and stuff at how do we hold things, right? Even how we hold healing, right? What stories we've been told about healing and what we think is possible, and is it all Western medicine? Is it all homeopathic? Is it all the self, right, and self empowerment, or some formula of that? And we all carry a different way of looking at it. And so today we're going to talk about that. And Karen, I know you do a lot of work in the theta healing realm and in the ancestral lineage work. And so I'd love to hear your perspective on when we talk about healing the past. How much of an impact does that have in our day-to-day lives as we go about things?
That's a really great question. I kind of look at it like you've got a lot of people on the board, that you've got your past and your present and your future. My teacher, Vienna Steibel, who is the founder of Theta Healing, used to talk about how we live in our past, present, and our future at all times. And in the work that I do, it's like all these different levels. So you've got ancestors, let me put it to you this way. If there's all these people in your boardroom at all times that are affecting the decisions that you make, so your ancestors are doing that, your past lives, our collective consciousness, and our experiences here, all of those things are, and that's what theta healing addresses. All of those things, or all of those people are affecting us with all the decisions that we make, and especially the ones that are like the knee-jerk reactions, right?
Hmm.
That we have, that then we go, wait a sec, that wasn't me, I'm so sorry, or whatever. That could have been an ancestor just kicking in a fear or a prejudice or a trauma or something like that, that we may have been wearing on our sleeve a little more than we knew. And so that can really affect the decisions we make right up to the moment that we're trying to move forward for something. And it could
Hmm.
happen in silliness of like, what shirt are you going to wear? But more likely it's coming when there's bigger decisions to be made. And but they do inform uh so vitally and so
Hmm.
powerfully on how we move forward. Absolutely.
I love that. And I come from the intercultural background, the study of how our how our programs, whether that be racially, ethnically, how those sort of play into our cultural understanding of things. And in that world, we talk a lot about things like time orientation, right? And we don't necessarily always recognize that by having different time orientations, by being predisposed to certain time orientations, it gives us a certain perspective on the world. And that's just one little itty bitty variable. But how we deal with people in terms of closeness, how we deal with people if we tend to come at them mentally or emotionally or physically or vibrationally, right? A lot of times that's informed by our upbringing, by our families, and by those social identities that make up who we are. And there are many of them, as you said. It's not just the members on the board, but it's also all of the various nuanced layers that we carry within ourselves. And so we can pull that from psychology, from sociology, and look at the really well-founded research in these areas of just taking those slices off the top and of the mental and emotional layers. And then we start digging deeper into these vibrational layers, these multidimensional things that we talk about in the consciousness realms and the spiritual realms, where there's a lot more richness underneath of there. And not all of us were taught to have those connections ancestrally, right? Some cultural groups are much better equipped for these conversations of those interconnectedness with past and present and future than others. And it can make it seem like we're almost talking from like two different worlds or 20,000 different worlds or whatever it may be. And I think that that was one of the most valuable lessons coming out of the pandemic, is that we don't necessarily share realities, right? We share spaces, but each of us sort of crafts our own reality based on that very precise like algorithm of variables that we carry within us. And it can make interactions, interpersonal interactions, group interactions, family interactions, like sometimes, you talked about when you notice things. I saw that a lot in our parenting, especially when Neva was younger, of like, wait, do I really think that way? Do I really believe
Uh,
that? Or is it simply a program that I'm kind of mimicking from what I was taught? Um, but we're not all sensitized to that equally, essentially, and how to look at it, how to hold it, what that means about who we are, right? And so what can we how can we sort of introduce everybody into this conversation today, especially those who aren't necessarily raised to think about their ancestral lineage, right? A lot of us
mm,
our racial ancestry and ethnic ancestry is one of amalgamation into groups. I'm thinking particularly about those considered white in the United States. A lot of us don't have a lot of strong ties to our ethnic and racial or ethnic backgrounds.
mm.
Um, and we see other groups that have stronger ties into that. How can we sort of encapsulate this, how to look at the ancestral lineage when you don't feel that connection to it? How can that serve us as we try to put some pieces back together and understand ourselves a little bit better, as we move forward into the future?
That's a really good question. I think that our I think people actually I do see even in Europeans, white Europeans, that there is a connection to the countries, like to the old country, and I can definitely see it um, in the way that people react to each other. And so I find that, and I find it interesting also because with Europeans, we tend to look at ourselves as we're here and then somebody's not here. Whereas when I've worked with Native Americans, for instance, they're like, oh, my uncle's right over there. Like my ancestors are all around me. They're always informing me.
Mhm.
And they're really fine with that sort of thing. And definitely more spiritually oriented people go, oh yeah, I can sense my mom's presence. She's always here with me. And and
Mhm.
and we have those sorts of things within our vernacular and within our understanding. So I do feel like there is that sense, and at the same time I think you feel a sort of like a calling is the best way that I can say that from the inside out, that there's something that you're responding to in a certain way that really feels almost like you're aligning with something that you didn't know was there, and why you believe that's right in this moment. As it doesn't necessarily have to be fixed thinking, or just like knowing, oh, I know. You can have
Mhm.
an experience, a new experience, but it feels old, like, going to the piano because you've had, generations of musicians and things like that. And for some reason you feel a lot more comfy than other people. And you may even have reactions to different types of people because of certain reactions. So I do believe that it's more of a noticing and saying, and just understanding in those spaces that, yeah, something feels familiar that isn't necessarily here in this present time. That's when you're hitting something ancestral. I guess that would be the best way I could do it. I could talk about it.
That's great advice. For me, it's like I have an awareness of always hearing guided voices, right? Guidance in
Hmm.
my consciousness. But there was a really, really distinct moment, not very long ago as time goes, probably a few years now, where all of a sudden I became very aware of what I called the women, right? I'm like the women's
Hmm.
voices came, like all of a sudden it was just
Uh,
women, and it was so many of them, and so many different types and kinds and shapes and sizes, and different ancestry represented in all of them. But could so clearly hear those voices. And it's not like hearing the voices, like audibly hearing them through my ears, but a knowing through hearing. And or actually for me it was more hearing through knowing, um that they were present.
uh,
I found it very comforting, right? But it wasn't something that I necessarily could pinpoint, like this is this person or this is this person,
mhm.
which, I can appreciate oh, this is my grandmother's voice or this is that.
Yeah.
And you can kind of place it in that way, but I approached it from a much broader scope of just knowing that connection to be true and allowing it to come through without needing to sort of analyze it too much, right? And that's sort of been my path. I don't necessarily always need to understand. I find my understanding comes from simply being in it, right? From having the experience. I always gain some level of understanding after the fact. And but it was so comforting. And there was real like guidance. Like at one point I was in the kitchen, and the next thing I know, I'm like doing all of this stuff in the kitchen, and it's adding this spice and doing this thing, and it was this magnificent meal. And I'm like, I don't know where it came from. And everyone's like, where did this come from? I'm like, I just felt very guided to do it in
Uh,
this way. And I was very open to that guidance.
uh,
But if someone insisted that I pinpoint, okay, what was it? Who was talking to you? Where did you get it from? What that my I don't ever really go into that space of needing
right.
to know that, but I know that a lot of modalities and stuff do offer that up, because not everyone has the same comfortability levels with the ambiguity, right? And so I can appreciate the those modalities that allow us to connect into our ancestors, and those that open us up to the experience others may be having with theirs, because I think we learn a lot that way, by allowing those cultural experiences that aren't our own to sort of influence us. And there's a fine line there from then taking that on as your own. And I think we want to be really delicate with that, especially as we talk about consciousness and spirituality in a large scope. Yes, we are all interconnected and we all share wisdom, and we're all connected to all roots of humanity. And yet we're in particular bodies here present, and in a big conversation as of late are things like really being sensitive to what is ours in the moment, and what and we've appropriated from others. And I know it can cause some internal strife for some people when you're trying to pull back all of those threads, and you want to be sensitive to others. And also you're on your own journey, right? You're on your path and it's guiding you where you're going. Do you have advice for people on how to tread lightly, right? To walk in our own steps, walk on our own path, and yet be open to that which is happening around us without feeling the need to sort of make it our own, and kind of take it and work with it, but rather allowing it to inform us in a really healthy and appreciative type of way.
Well, first of all, I want your ancestor who's helping you become a better chef, because that's like the coolest thing I've ever heard. I've never tried
It
to do
was so
that.
fun.
Oh my God, that's like, this is why people should channel chefs like at dinner, like just whatever you have, whatever you have in your cupboards.
Bring it
We're gonna
through.
I'm gonna channel Julia Child next time. So I think it's actually, what you said, it's really allowing, it's really trusting your inner knowing, right? And becoming coming right in here, just trusting yourself and making sure you're in your body, because we tend, and I know I tend to do this too, because I can be I'm a very heart-centered person, but I can be very cerebral, and I could be, going around and this is what's going on, right? And be very like, okay, and I got to solve this and this has to happen. And then there's 45,000 things to do, right? We're moms. We've got a lot to do. And a lot of us also are caring for other people too, right? We're caring for aging parents and then our kids. So we're kind of sandwiched in here. So I believe this is about really reminding yourself that you're coming back to being present, coming back to being in your body and going, oh yeah, I'm right here, instead of in the lists and in the other story, or going back into your past. And because I think we tend to, how do I say this? We get addicted to feeling a certain way, right? And so if I feel like I'm always behind the eight ball, or I feel like I should be somewhere, I should be further along in my life than I am, or I always feel left behind, or left out. If I'm walking around with that, I'm not present at all. I'm just trying to seek out that feeling and trying to seek out those experiences that validate how I'm feeling. And if we're in our past to, traumas and things that kind of stuck us, we kind of got stuck there, that we're just reliving it and we're not coming in, and we need to come back here and understand that the past, it's very informative. The past is very informative. I do believe there's much to heal there, and so that we can feel free and feel freer to move forward with more clarity and more purpose, because I believe that we are here to love ourselves. We're here to have joy and to love ourselves. And the more we love ourselves, the more we have joy, and the more we have joy, the more we love ourselves. And so really leaning into that, you're going to find a tremendous amount of healing and a lot more presence than you may have had this other way of just being in here and getting the lists done and taking care of this and that and this and that and that.
Mm. I love that. I love that. And it reminds us, I think it allows for that appreciation of the self.
Yeah.
And when we feel that way, right? I talk
Mm-hmm.
about, kind of sitting in your own power, right? Like holding your own center. Um,
Absolutely.
it doesn't have like it's almost like it provides this whole full experience of your own existence, and then you're not needing to grab this and grab that and grab this and grab that, but when you feel that way, there is this like permeability that allows it to be flavored by things,
Right.
right? So it allows it to be enhanced without feeling like you have to grab this and grab that. Whereas when we feel less than, you spoke of, kind
Yeah.
of feeling like you need to chase that, we naturally will look to anyone who feels like they have more than and want that, right? like
Right.
like wait,
Yeah.
they have more than I do and I want that. And a lot of times when we're talking about things like ancestrally in our past, some of us come from some past that have very voluntarily been forgotten because they're painful,
Right.
right? Or embarrassing or shameful. And there's a real movement right now to just turn around and look at that and say, hey, like that may have been true of the families that I came from, the generations that I came from, but in this moment I get to make a different choice. Not just erase it away, but say, wow, like I can see the impact that had on so many. Not to carry that guilt, but to say, okay, what can we do now? right? How do I have a voice in it now? And as I mentioned, coming from the intercultural background, I taught critical race theory, I taught white racial identity trainings, and it's tough when you have a background and you're part of a cultural group that has done real atrocious things to
Right.
others. Now, most cultural groups have done atrocious things to some other, but we have to look at, like, what is the guilt that we're carrying around from that, that may or may not be ours personally, but that yet becomes ours when we refuse to look at it. And again, it's a delicate game to play, because that strength, that awareness of self is required to be able to stand and say, hey, I can turn around and look at this and not take it on as who I am right now, and still take some responsibility for what I've gained from that, right? We talk about things like privilege,
Hmm.
and how do you hold privilege responsibly, right? If you're part of systems that have created positions of privilege and you benefit from that, how do you hold that responsibly?
Hmm.
How do you assist in the dialogue and the change that needs to occur so that it can be different moving forward? And when we approach it from that place, it can feel very empowering without disempowering somebody else. And that's the key. I became fascinated about, how do we responsibly hold power? It's not meant to make ourselves feel less than, right? It comes from the perspective that there's an abundance in the universe as a whole. How do we learn to open that up and open ourselves up to creative ways to make room for everybody? And I feel like that sort of friction has really come to the surface, and we get to choose how we face that friction. Do we hide from it? Do we fight it? Right? These are trauma reactions, and how we react are that's programmed in us. But we get to say what we respond to. We get to say which programs are active within us. We get to take steps to learn how to empower ourselves, to reprogram ourselves, so we're not responding from survival trauma programs, but rather from that whole fulfilled place that we spoke of. So we're comfortable having these conversations that are really painful sometimes to walk through, but knowing yourself within it gives you the ability to say, I can hear that. Wow, I can feel that, right?
Right.
And how can I help? What can I do? Educating ourselves to say, hey, this is what I can do, right? And this is how I can make reparations. This is how I can make change now, here in this moment, for the things that are within my sphere of influence. And so I know that with the theta healing work that you do, and the focus on our ancestry, right? That's one of the things that you're able to do with people in a one-on-one setting, in group settings, where you can connect in with that and say, hey, we can hold this differently, right?
Right.
Perhaps it's having you, like you said, like this robotic, like knee-jerk reaction if we're not aware.
Right.
But if we are aware, we get to bring it up to the surface rather than hide from it and go, oh, yeah, no, this doesn't work for me now. How can we change this? Right? What would you add on to that?
Well, there's, I believe that, the generation that we're in right now gets to be, we get the chance to be a light, you know, to the ancestors, because I do believe that they're still around us all the time. I do believe that and that's part of this work too, is to go back and really understand what were their fears, what are their prejudices, what were their traumas, and heal those things energetically, so that people can feel these sort of, now people can feel like these invisible barriers that were here that they didn't even know were here. Why were they
Mhm.
afraid to go forward this way? Why were they afraid to be seen and heard? Why were they afraid to speak out? It may not be from right now, or it may be because you came from a persecuted people and you're trying to, move forward. And I always talk about it as like this evolution, right? Because I remember watching something in 60 Minutes, which was so great, which was about this woman who found out, like through some ancestral, like a DNA thing, test, that she was an ancestor, one of the main families that brought slavery to the United States. And when she found out, and she wanted to bring this out, and the whole family, like all the cousins and everybody, just like disowned her. And she had the I guess they had inherited this plantation, where they kind of started everything. Like they knew they were in the South, but they didn't know like this was one of the anchor, families that did this. And she was like, no, come here. We're gonna, my great grandfather, he brought people here, and and just like, we've got to learn from this. We've got to honor this history, because this history is being erased. And because everybody is so uncomfortable, because there's a lot of shames. There's a shame that people can have, because they're like, I didn't do this. Why are you mad at me? I didn't do this. I'm not responsible for that. So let's just put it over here. And so you got to deal with those heavy guilts and those heavy shames and that trauma, that even the ancestors caused other people. And so you can work in this work. Like I'll just tell you, because since we haven't talked about it in this one, the work that I use, called theta healing, it's just a meditation. It connects you to God, or your inner wisdom, the universe, whatever that word is for you, so that you can connect with your subconscious mind and change these bottom beliefs that are holding you back. So this is the I'm nothing, I'm worthless, I need to hide, right? I need to be invisible, those sorts of things. And energetically, with your permission, you can shift those beliefs, and then also release trapped emotions. And, we're talking about the ones that have become toxic, right? Anger, betrayal, trauma. Those things in and of themselves aren't bad emotions. They're not even really negative emotions. They're just a natural reaction to something that's happened. But they've been sitting there marinating, maybe for generations, not only from you, but from everybody else. And so you're reacting to that. And it gets replaced with your permission. Since you're connecting in like that, you get the chance to replace it with unconditional love and understanding and compassion. And what happens when you do this on both of those levels, on the belief level and on the feeling level, is that you feel empowered and uplifted, and you start being able to do the things that, for whatever reason, you were putting off and running away from and avoiding. All of a sudden, it's easy to clean your desk and take all the boxes out of your living room and go, oh, I feel now I'm not running from a trauma I didn't know existed, or one that I thought existed, but not to the degree that I had it. And so all of a sudden you feel like you can do the things that make you that move you forward in the way that you've always wanted to. So it's not just sit here and meditate and wait for the world to change for you. It's like you're now doing this, and now you can make decisions that are going to be easier. And because now the energy feels better, you're in a flow, right? You have a surfboard and there's a wave out there. You still got to paddle out, and you got to know how to stand and do everything in order for that to work for you. And so you're that part, right? You're the surfer. So you've got to get on the board and start going forward. And when you do that, everything just flows so much easier, because the decisions you're making, right? The decisions you're making and the way you're allowing other people to help you out and feel the support of the universe and get happier, get happier and happier, and stop breaking promises to yourself, right? And take your needs into consideration, then you just start feeling better and lighter, and you start making more decisions in support of yourself. Your boundaries get better, because you don't feel like you deserve to be mistreated anymore, right? Or that you deserve to be at the bottom of the list. Because I'm telling you, if you're someone in that sandwich generation, then the closer your needs are to the top of the list, the more you're going to be able to help the people around you. And I know that the people who come to me are people who are like the rocks of their family, right? They're the ones who give the best advice. They're the ones everybody leans on. And they're taking care of their parents. They're taking care of their kids. They're taking care of their spouse. And there's a lot going on in all of that. And so their needs go down. But then that's like breaking promises to yourself. When you don't make yourself happy, when you leave your guitar over there and it just collects dust, or you stop writing your book, or you do whatever it is that used to make you happy and you stop doing it because you just don't have the time, you're just breaking promises, breaking promises, breaking promises. So when you
Mhm.
just start to move into that other place, because all these barriers are starting to move away, and you're like, ooh, I can take a day off. That'd be fun. Or I can play my guitar in the middle of the day for no reason. That's good too. You know what I mean? You just like, oh, look
Beautiful.
at me. I'm making myself happy. Oh, that's cool. Like simple things can become so much more powerful and so much more empowering in your life.
And it's self-perpetuating because
Yes.
you open yourself up to enlightened guidance, inspired guidance, and then you know how to deal with the stuff from your past, right? Then you feel empowered to say, "Yeah, I'm not gonna hide from this secret. You all can pretend if you want to, but I'm not carrying this burden anymore, and I'm gonna be honest about it." Right?
Yeah.
And I'm gonna say, "Hey, this isn't cool. What happened here? How can I make change toward the better?" Right? Because even if we're not the ones responsible for creating those programs that we carry, as we become more aware of them, we are responsible for perpetuating them, right? Whether
Right.
it's passing them on to our kids with no hope or help of how to deal with them in a different way,
Right.
forcing them to kind of keep them in hiding and allow them to keep festering. Somebody's got to break the cycle. I know that that's a common conversation in our house, and he was very consciously aware of like of her active participation in breaking some of these cycles because the way we see it is like, okay, if I didn't fix this before you came along, then you carry some element of it. We might as well work together on it, right? We looked at guilt. Right, and
Yeah.
guilt is just one of these huge ones. Most of us carry it in some form or fashion as a program of response to certain things. And we just kind of looked at each other at one point and said, no, like you don't want to feel this way. I don't want to feel this way. I don't want to make you feel this way. You don't want to make me feel this way because if I make you feel guilty, then I feel guilty for making you feel guilty. And it just kind of perpetuates this whole thing. Like, what if instead we just make a pact that we're not going to play that game? And it you don't have to have the answer. Like, we didn't know what would come in the place of it. We didn't know what program would be installed instead of that. But it starts with just saying no, like no to the toxicity,
Right.
sitting in the space and conviction of that together, and then letting what comes in light and in love to replace that program and to say, okay, when we feel uncomfortable or scared or upset, instead of this, we're going to instead sit for a moment and we're going to say, "Hey, I feel uncomfortable. I'm
Mm-hmm.
noticing discomfort in my system. I'm noticing right now that I want to blame you for this
Mm-hmm.
because right now I can't see my role in it, but all relationships are two people interacting. So there's always a flip side to that angle. No one's ever just the perpetrator with no I'm not going to say no one, but oftentimes we see this sort of two sides of the same coin happening. I call them the push pulls,
Mm-hmm.
where the thing that you say this person always does, it's like, okay, but what is the thing in you that complements that invites it in, that
Right.
creates it, that triggers it? What is it? How does this work together, right? And you can start playing with those things when you're willing to be a little bit more open and honest with yourself about how you're feeling before you do the reaction, right? Like, okay, why do I want to right now lash out about this thing? How am I feeling inside? And usually if you dig way deep in there, it's some element of fear, right? Something that says the world's big, bad, and scary, and this is the person that perpetrated that against you,
Mm-hmm.
or reminded you that the world is big, bad, and scary. But back to at the beginning of the conversation, when you feel whole and complete unto yourself, the world doesn't seem so big, bad, and scary. So what it does is it decreases the amount of times you have those reactions, right? And you can see how this feedback loop starts to feed itself in the positive, to where now you're like, oh, wait, I can respond differently. I can sit and have this uncomfortable conversation and trust that on the other side of this, I'm going to feel better. We're going
Mm-hmm.
to have come to some sort of a conclusion or arrangement, or we'll try something new, or we'll try again tomorrow. Um, but it does create this beautiful feedback loop that, I mean, we see it to the negative, right? Like the
Right.
snowball effect. We can take that dynamic and put it towards the positive of, you open those spaces up and you're informed differently. You respond differently.
Hmm.
And so it creates the space for you to show up very differently. And that's what invites in different guidance. That's what allows us to, as you were talking, I was imagining like, instead of thinking like this guilt or this these negative feelings about something your ancestors have done, kind of ask yourself, what would they do now given the knowledge that we have?
Right.
Right? And what would they want us to do on their behalf given the knowledge that we have? And sort of as a gift back into all of those who came before, because they gave you really great things too, healing that and saying, hey, it's okay. Like, I don't understand why you did these things. I wasn't there. I didn't make those decisions. And they look really terrible from this position. And a lot of them were, but what would you do now differently? Right?
Mm.
Knowing what we know now, what can we do differently? And it gives them a chance to sort of, even if they've passed, to free that, right? At least it frees you from carrying the burden of that. You can't speak for them, you don't know them at that level, perhaps, but if you imagine it that way, it frees you now, and that can then create a very different future.
Absolutely.
What advice can do you have for people who don't feel that connection into their ancestors, but they want to work with this in a way that allows them to move forward? Like if it feels weird to them to think about their ancestors close by,
Yeah.
or the the ghost thing, or the spirit thing, like how can they hold this in a real practical sense that it also can kind of open them up to receiving information differently than perhaps they're used to?
I think I wanted to come back to something that you said before, because it may end up answering what you're asking now. When you were talking about like the shame and the guilt, and making this an uncomfortable conversation, having an uncomfortable conversation and surviving it, right? And being okay, I was uncomfortable, now we're okay. Or have somebody react to you as if you were the ancestor. And I think there's, and I see it a lot in women. I know other people have this too, but this feeling of I'm responsible for everyone and everything. And that adds a lot of heaviness. And I think that guilt is also an attempt. I mean, guilt can show you a moral compass, can make you aware of a moral compass. And then on the other side of it, I think that guilt can be this attempt to control the past. That, if I feel so bad about what happened, if I could only, go back there and change it, I would, and I can't, and I feel so bad that I can't go back and do that,
Mhm.
right? And or I made such a poor decision in this one place, and I just want to go back and redo it, get a redo. We all want the time machine, and I think regret and guilt is definitely shame can be too, like these unhealthy time machines we're trying to take back, or these rickety time machines that don't quite work because you just kind of
Mhm.
loop through and loop through. And I think we have to be we have to know that we're not responsible for everyone and everything, that we can allow other people their own experiences, because um a lot of us tend to, and I know the people who come to me be people who take on other people's energy, emotion, and experience in order to heal them. It's a very big thing, and it's a big thing being a parent and wanting to do that too, and being female and wanting to do that. So it doesn't help. I it's so funny because my mom I used to say she was a sponge, like she was such a sponge, right? And if I said that, I hit my arm against the side of the door or something like that, which wasn't that uncommon, she'd be like, "Oh, honey, which arm?" Like she tried to grab. And that was her way of being loving. Like she had to
Mhm.
embrace everything and get it away. And I remember one time when my daughter was probably like two, like in the one and change, almost 2 years old, and she was in between my legs, right? You couldn't be in a more secure place in that moment. Just got her arms around my legs, and she fell and like hit her lip, and her lip bled. It wasn't a big deal at all, but like her worst injury, right, at that point in time. And I saw that, and those two things, I was like, wow, you really, they're gonna fall, they're gonna do this, you have to
Hmm.
allow them their own experience. You don't want them, you don't usually want anybody to be in pain. And at the same time, you have to allow that's just part of life. And it's okay just to kind of reel that in, and just be aware when it happens. With this work, we'll go energetically, obviously, into your subconscious mind, and go onto these levels, and be able to transform them in a really deep level. And if you're doing it without going to into your subconscious, without going into a meditation, then it really is, it's just the awareness, like, oh, look at me, I'm doing that again, you know and creating something where you feel like you're stepping back from that,
Hmm.
and saying, I can do something else here. I don't need to go on to that. And I always say, like, and I don't, this, how do I say this? Um, how to reframe a fear. Let me put it to you this way. Like, instead of saying, worrying, I say that worrying is a focused prayer on a bad outcome, right? Please. My mom's was the best. I loved my mom's was dead in the gutter. Like, if we didn't come back on time and we didn't call, and this is before cell phones, right? I'm dead in the gutter, right? We're dead in the gutter. And I didn't understand being on her side of it back then,
Hmm.
obviously. But that's where she went. And so we had to kind of shift that kind of thinking, and bring it to a different place, in order to just realize that you don't have to go to the worst possible place. You can always come back and be here. And so instead, what you can do is say, instead of looking at the or you can look at the worry, because the worry is going to come up naturally, right? Your kid's gone for too long, and you're like, you're starting to get worried. It's like, what are you looking forward to? And say, well, what I'm looking forward to is my kid coming back and totally fine. She may get
Hmm.
grounded for it, or she may have some sort of correction involved in this. I'm looking forward
Hmm.
to her coming back. And so it allows you to still use your imagination, but in a way that frames it in a positive way, in a
Hmm.
positive manner.
Fabulous.
And yeah, you want to take language, and help it, you know, help you, in those moments,
Hmm.
because we can go somewhere else. I'm not, I'm responsible for my behavior. You're responsible for your behavior, but I'm not responsible for my ancestors' behavior. I can't, there's nothing I can do about that. And so, and I always find that interesting, when we've got all these cultural grudges and religious grudges, right, on religious groups, because of something that happened 3,000 years ago, and you're like, how is anybody responsible for that? But
Right.
it can justify your actions, right? It can justify what you want. So, but I always say that when you start bringing those things around, you're gonna come to a different place. And there's this one access consciousness thing that I heard recently that I really liked, and it was, does my awareness exceed my allowance? Like, what are you allowing to happen? It's not as big as what you're aware of happening. And so you can always say, let my allowance exceed my awareness.
Hmm.
And so that you can open up to yourself, allowing other people to have their own experiences without having to take that on, to stop earning your existence. You're in this moment of earning your existence. I mean, have you ever done that, where you feel like you're over helping or over giving, right? We've all been there at some point in our lives, right? We're over giving and over helping. We're earning our existence, and finding yourself in this moment going, oh, okay. Does my awareness exceed my allowance? No, I want my allowance to exceed my awareness, and just go, I don't have to do this at all. I'm a good person. I can be at this party without cleaning up. I can be helpful too, but I don't have to do all of it, you know,
Beautiful.
and, just be a part of that solution.
even without seeing how it's going to unfold. I think that's what's so
Right.
great about what you're sharing is you don't have to know the details, right? You're saying, it's like we have all these tendencies that we want to chastise ourselves for because they produce what we would deem negative results, but we can take those same behavioral programs and say, hey, what if we use these for good? Right? It's
Mm-hmm.
kind of like using your superpowers for good. If it's a part of your natural makeup, it's much easier to give it something to focus on that's for the positive than to just
Mm-hmm.
continually berate yourself or try to get rid of it. It's kind of like replacing a habit that you want to stop with a habit that you want to cultivate. That's
Mm-hmm.
the easiest way to go about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I love that very practical advice. Karen, thank you so much. We're going to start wrapping up here. Again, we've been talking all about healing the past. Karen, where can people go to find out more about your work with theta healing?
Oh, sure. You can go visit my website. It's at thinktheta.com. So that's
Fabulous.
THINK, like think, theta.com. That's the easiest way you can get me. And on there, I have more contact information that you can get me more, right in there. You can email me at Karen@thinktheta.com also if you're
Brilliant.
interested in playing.
Fabulous. I absolutely recommend that you connect with Karen. If this resonates with you, if you're ready to sort of sit in that space of like, yes, please, I just want that feeling of wholeness, right? That connection into self to be able to turn some of these things around. You may have everything fine and be successful and all of these other components, but your inner game may be suggesting something different to you from time to time. Connect with Karen to help out with that. And if you'd like to work with some techniques on your own, you can always check out our energetic sensitization course at superpowerexperts.com. Go to the courses and you'll see that there. It gives you some steps that you can do on your own and in your own way, but guides you through that so you can start to sensitize yourself to what we're talking about here and start looking at some of those elements and feel more whole and complete within yourself. And we invite you to take a look at that. Karen, thank you again for coming back on the show. We'll put links on the episode page for our past episode with Karen, for link to her website. Make sure you go and check that out, folks. We really appreciate you coming on the show, Karen. I'm sure I'll have you back on sometime soon.
Well, thank you so much. It's been such an honor and such a joy. Thank you.
Oh, great. Well, thank you. And to all of you out there, we appreciate the fact that you've supported the network over all of these years. We know that we're ranked where we are because of you, and it means a lot to us. So until next time, remember who you are. We love you, love each other. Goodbye for now.